Understanding the stigma, where the pressure to partner comes from. Cultural expectations, tradition versus modern reality, historical norms and their origins. Marriage wasn't always about love. For most of human history, it functioned as an economic arrangement, a merger of resources, labor, and property. Women were quite literally transferred from their father's household to their husband's, with dowries and bride prices negotiated like business contracts. The romantic notion that you should marry for affection, mutual respect, or personal fulfillment is remarkably recent, gaining traction only in the last 2 centuries. Before industrialization, households operated as economic units where every member contributed labor. A single adult, particularly a woman, faced genuine survival challenges without access to property rights, credit, or most paid work. Marriage was functional necessity, not lifestyle choice. This wasn't about personal happiness. It was about having a roof over your head and food on the table. These practical origins continue to haunt us. The expectations our grandparents absorbed as children, that women needed husbands for financial security, that men needed wives to manage households, weren't based on outdated values alone. They reflected actual economic realities of their time. Women couldn't open bank accounts without male permission in many countries until the 1960s and 1970s. Credit cards, mortgages, business loans all required a husband's signature. The assumption that everyone should partner up made sense when going solo meant genuine hardship. But here's what's fascinating. We've dismantled most of those structural barriers, yet the cultural script hasn't caught up. We're still performing a play written for a world that no longer exists. Understanding this history doesn't excuse the pressure you might feel today, but it does explain where it comes from. Those anxious questions from well-meaning relatives, the subtle assumptions that you're still looking, the surprise when you mention traveling alone, they're echoes of a time when singleness genuinely signaled vulnerability. Recognizing these patterns as historical artifacts rather than universal truths gives you permission to write your own script. The economic imperative has dissolved. What remains is choice. The shift to modern realities. The landscape has fundamentally changed. Between 1960 and 2020, the median age at first marriage in the United States jumped from 20.3 for women and 22.8 for men to 28.6 and 30.4 respectively. That's not a minor adjustment. It represents a wholesale recalibration of adult development. People now spend their 20s and increasingly their 30s building careers, establishing financial independence, and figuring out who they actually are before even considering partnership. United States Census Bureau 2021. Modern singleness operates in an entirely different ecosystem than it did for previous generations. Women own property, control their finances, and pursue careers without needing anyone's permission or signature. Men cook their own meals, manage households, and build social networks beyond workplace drinking buddies. The skills and resources that once required a partner are now widely distributed individual capabilities. This shift goes deeper than logistics. Corporations adapted faster than families did, recognizing that their workforce no longer followed predictable life patterns. Flexible work arrangements, remote options, parental leave policies that acknowledge diverse family structures. These emerged because businesses had to accommodate reality. Meanwhile, many families still operate on outdated assumptions, asking, "When are you going to settle down?" to someone who bought their own house 3 years ago. Settlement looks different now. It might mean a stable career, a chosen city, a circle of deep friendships, or financial security, none of which require a romantic partner. Legal structures have gradually caught up too. Domestic partnership benefits, healthcare portability, inheritance rights that protect chosen family rather than just blood relatives. These represent institutional acknowledgement that adult life takes multiple valid forms. Same-sex marriage legalization didn't just matter for LGBTQ+ couples. It fundamentally challenged the notion that there's one correct template for building a life. If marriage itself can be redefined, so can the choice not to pursue it. The data tells a story our cultural narratives haven't fully absorbed. Single-person households now represent approximately 29% of all U.S. households, the largest share in recorded history. That's not a collection of people waiting for their real lives to begin. That's millions of adults who've structured their existence around priorities other than partnership. Some are single by circumstance, others by preference, most by some combination of both. What unites them isn't loneliness or incompleteness, but participation in a demographic reality that's become perfectly ordinary. United States Census Bureau, 2023. Yet ordinary doesn't mean accepted. The institutional changes have outpaced emotional and cultural ones, creating this strange dissonance where you can live a fully independent single life while still fielding concerned questions about your romantic prospects. Impact on personal identity. Cultural norms don't just exist around you, they construct how you understand yourself. When society consistently presents partnership as the default setting for adult life, choosing otherwise requires active resistance against messages you've internalized since childhood. You're not just making a practical decision about living arrangements or romantic involvement. You're positioning yourself against a framework that shaped your earliest understanding of what constitutes a successful, complete person. Identity formation happens through both affirmation and negation. You learn who you are partly by what others reflect back to you. When extended family members express concern about your single status, when colleagues assume you have unlimited availability because you don't have a real family, when medical forms default to marital status as a key demographic, these aren't neutral interactions. They're constant small messages suggesting your chosen life represents something missing rather than something whole. The psychological weight accumulates. Research on social identity theory demonstrates that people derive significant self-concept from group membership and cultural categories. When the dominant cultural categories don't accommodate your reality, you face what psychologists call identity invalidation, the experience of having your self-understanding contradicted by external messaging. A 2019 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships highlighted how single adults often experience discrimination and marginalization, with perceived discrimination being negatively associated with their life satisfaction. McPhee and Schmaling, 2019. This matters because your sense of self isn't some fixed internal essence immune to outside influence. You develop confidence, security, and self-worth through a complex interplay between internal values and external validation. When those sources conflict, when you feel content with your life but society keeps suggesting you shouldn't be, maintaining authentic self-understanding requires deliberate effort. The tension intensifies around milestone ages. Turning 40 without a partner can trigger what researchers describe as biographical disruption, a concept applied to single individuals whose lives deviate from normative paths. A moment when your actual life trajectory visibly diverges from cultural scripts you absorbed growing up. McPhee, 2018. Even if you've consciously rejected those scripts, they still form part of your psychological landscape. You might intellectually understand that singleness is valid while emotionally wrestling with old narratives suggesting otherwise. Navigating this isn't about eliminating external pressure, that's largely beyond your control. It's about developing robust internal frameworks that can withstand contradictory cultural messaging. That means actively cultivating reference points beyond conventional relationship milestones. Communities that affirm your choices, values clarification that grounds decisions in personal meaning rather than social expectation, and deliberate practices that reinforce self-worth independent of partnership status. The goal isn't defiance for its own sake, but clarity about whose definitions you're living by. Psychological underpinnings. Why we crave approval. The roots of approval seeking. We form our sense of self in the gaze of others. The first mirror you ever had wasn't glass, but your mother's face. Or whoever raised you, learning what mattered by watching what elicited warmth, concern, or disapproval. That mechanism doesn't switch off when you turn 18 or 40. The need for validation runs deeper than culture or choice. It's wired into human development. Developmental psychologists describe attachment theory as the blueprint for how we navigate relationships throughout life. Children who received consistent, positive attention develop what researchers call secure attachment, an internalized sense that they're worthy of care regardless of performance or compliance. But many of us absorbed a different lesson. That love arrived conditionally, tied to specific behaviors or achievements. Maybe affection flowed freely when you brought home good grades, but withdrew when you disappointed. Maybe your parents praised you for being responsible or not causing problems, teaching you that your value lay in meeting others' needs. Those early patterns become templates. By the time you're navigating adult social structures, you've already learned whether your worth is intrinsic or something you must continually earn. Approval-seeking behavior doesn't indicate weakness or insecurity in some personality flaw sense. It reflects rational adaptation to environments that rewarded conformity and punished deviation. If speaking up at the dinner table resulted in criticism, you learn to stay quiet. If expressing your actual preferences created tension, you learn to mirror what others wanted. This operates mostly outside conscious awareness. You might genuinely believe you're making autonomous choices while still running invisible calculations about what will maintain acceptance. When your sister asks yet again if you're dating anyone, the discomfort you feel isn't just annoyance. It's your nervous system registering a threat to belonging. Your brain processes social rejection using the same neural pathways as physical pain. Functional MRI studies, such as a seminal 2003 study by Eisenberger, Lieberman, and Williams, have shown that social exclusion activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a brain region strongly associated with the distressing component of physical pain. Eisenberger et al. 2003. Humans evolved in small groups where exclusion meant literal survival risk. Being cast out of your tribe in ancestral environments often meant death. No access to shared resources, no protection from predators, no support during illness. Our brains haven't caught up to modern reality where you can thrive independently. The anxiety you experience when your choices diverge from group norms isn't irrational. It's an ancient alarm system detecting danger that no longer exists in the same form. This explains why knowing intellectually that your single life is valid doesn't automatically silence the internal critic. You're not just battling ideas, but physiology, the deep regulatory systems that govern belonging and safety. When you announce you're not interested in dating, you might notice physical sensations: tightness in your chest, heat in your face, an impulse to justify or explain. Those aren't thoughts. They're your body preparing for potential rejection. Childhood experiences with validation shape how intensely you experience this. If your parents dismissed your feelings, you're too sensitive, or made love contingent on achievement, you likely developed heightened vigilance around approval. You learn to monitor others' reactions constantly, adjusting yourself to maintain connection. That pattern persists even when circumstances change completely. The cultural messaging around partnership lands particularly hard when it echoes early attachment wounds. If you grew up feeling that you had to earn love by being what others needed, then society's insistence that you're incomplete without a partner activates those old vulnerabilities. The external pressure finds internal traction because it resonates with an existing belief that your worth depends on fulfilling prescribed roles. Understanding this mechanism doesn't dissolve it immediately, but it creates distance. Recognizing that your discomfort around being single might reflect conditioned responses rather than actual deficiency changes the conversation you're having with yourself. Social and cultural conditioning. Stanford psychologist Gregory Walton, alongside Jeffrey Cohen, conducted a series of studies demonstrating how powerfully social norms shape our sense of belonging. In a seminal 2011 experiment published in Science, Walton and Cohen 2011, 92 college students participated, with African American students reading testimonials from older students describing their own struggles with fitting in during freshman year. The intervention was deceptively simple. It normalized difficulty as temporary rather than evidence of not belonging. African American students who received this message showed improved grades over 3 years, effectively reducing the racial achievement gap by 52%, and also reported better health outcomes years later compared to control groups. Walton and Cohen, 2011. What changed wasn't their circumstances, but their interpretation of social feedback. The mechanism Walton identified applies directly to your experience as a single adult over 40. When everyone around you follows a partnership script, your brain interprets deviation as evidence you don't belong rather than evidence the script is narrow. The cultural message isn't neutral information. It's a constant stream of data your nervous system uses to assess your standing within your community. Social proof, the psychological phenomenon where we look to others' behavior to determine our own, operates with particular force around major life decisions. When 90% of your high school graduating class is married, the remaining 10% experiences pressure that isn't imaginary. Your brain registers the statistical outlier status and generates anxiety designed to pull you back toward group norms. This intensifies at gatherings where relationship status becomes visible: weddings, family reunions, holiday parties. You're not being paranoid when you feel scrutinized. You're accurately reading an environment organized around assumptions you don't meet. Here's how to dismantle this pattern step by step. First, externalize the voice. When you catch yourself thinking, I should be partnered by now, pause and ask whose voice that actually is. Write down the specific people and messages that taught you this belief. Your aunt who asked intrusive questions? The romantic comedies you watched growing up? The financial advice that assumed dual incomes? Getting specific breaks, the illusion that these are your authentic values rather than absorbed scripts. Second, actively seek counterexamples. Your brain has a negativity bias. It notices threats and problems more readily than safety and possibility. Deliberately catalog people living fulfilled single lives, whether they're public figures, colleagues, or friends. Create a physical or digital collection of these examples. This isn't about convincing yourself singleness is superior, but about providing your nervous system with evidence that the category successful adult includes multiple templates. Third, practice values clarification separate from social feedback. Set aside 30 minutes with no distractions. Write responses to these prompts. What brings you genuine satisfaction? When do you feel most yourself? What would you do differently if no one would ever know or comment? The goal is accessing your actual preferences underneath the static of others' expectations. Most people discover significant gaps between what they're pursuing and what they actually want. Fourth, reframe discomfort as information rather than error. When you feel anxious about being single, that sensation isn't proof something's wrong with your life. It's proof you're receiving cultural messages designed to make you feel that way. Your discomfort is evidence the social pressure exists, not evidence you should comply with it. This distinction matters enormously. Instead of, I feel bad, therefore my life is wrong, try, I feel bad because I'm swimming against strong currents, which means I need better support, not different choices. Build concrete structures that provide validation outside traditional frameworks. Join communities organized around interests rather than relationship status. Develop rituals that mark your own milestones, career achievements, personal growth, creative projects, with the same significance others assign to anniversaries and baby showers. The approval you're seeking won't arrive from sources invested in the partnership narrative. Media influence, shaping our views on singleness. Historical media narratives. Start by noticing what you actually consume. For the next week, keep a simple tally of how single characters appear in the shows, films, and books you encounter. Don't analyze yet, just count. How many single characters exist primarily as comic relief? How many are framed as incomplete, desperately searching, or tragically alone? How many are content, complex, and simply living their lives without their relationship status serving as the plot's central problem? The patterns reveal themselves quickly. You'll notice the 30th birthday crisis repeated across decades of storytelling, the wedding invitation that triggers existential panic, the successful career dismissed as hollow without a partner to share it. These aren't random story choices, they're deliberate narrative frameworks that teach us how to interpret our own lives. When we see the same storyline recycled from a 1950s rom-com to last week's streaming release, we're witnessing the remarkable persistence of cultural messaging about what makes a life meaningful. Write down specific scenes or lines that land uncomfortably. That moment when a character's professional achievement gets overshadowed by questions about her personal life. The joke about the single uncle at Thanksgiving that everyone laughs at but nobody questions. The subplot where a perfectly content single character suddenly realizes they've been missing out all along. You're building awareness of the narrative architecture that shapes how we see ourselves and the choices we make. Historical media made little effort to disguise its bias. Single women over a certain age were spinsters, pitiable, bitter, or both. Single men were playboys avoiding responsibility or bachelors nursing secret wounds. These portrayals weren't reflections of reality, but instructions for how society expected people to feel about unconventional choices. What's shifted isn't the core message, but its delivery method. Modern media wraps the same assumptions in more sophisticated packaging. Characters announce they're fine with being single in ways that suggest they're absolutely not fine. Story arcs reward personal growth with romantic partnership, as if one couldn't exist meaningfully without the other. This matters because internalized stigma doesn't announce itself with obvious signs. It shows up in the subtle discomfort you feel when answering questions about your weekend, the reflexive apology embedded in how you describe your life choices, the assumption that your contentment requires explanation or defense. Modern portrayals of singleness. Turn on any streaming service today and you'll find a peculiar contradiction. Modern media celebrates independence while simultaneously suggesting it's incomplete. The single character might have the corner office and the dream apartment, but watch closely. There's always that lingering camera shot on the empty wine glass, the unused second pillow, the vacant chair across the dinner table. Contemporary media has gotten more sophisticated in how it portrays singleness. We're past the era of the desperate spinster or the emotionally stunted bachelor as the only archetypes. Today's single characters run companies, save lives, travel the world. They're portrayed as capable, interesting people. Yet even these evolved portrayals often carry an underlying message. This is temporary. This is the before picture. The real story begins when someone comes along. Social media amplifies this complexity in ways television never could. Your feed fills with friends' engagement announcements, anniversary celebrations, family photos. The algorithm favors these moments because they generate engagement. Likes, comments, shares. What gets lost in this digital curation is the full picture. You see the highlight reel of coupled life while comparing it to your behind-the-scenes reality. But here's what's changing. More creators, influencers, and storytellers are building platforms around intentional single living. They're sharing travel adventures undertaken solo, home renovations completed independently, careers built without compromise. These counter-narratives matter because they provide alternative models of what a full life looks like. The impact on your self-perception runs deeper than you might realize. When every romantic comedy ends with the couple getting together, when every drama suggests that true emotional growth requires a partner, when social media algorithms prioritize relationship milestones, these messages accumulate. They create an internal narrative that your life is somehow pending, awaiting its real beginning. Recognizing this influence gives you power over it. You can't unsee the patterns once you notice them. The way single characters are often portrayed as works in progress, the subtle suggestions that independence equals loneliness, the persistent framing of partnership as life's ultimate goal. Understanding these portrayals helps you separate media fiction from your lived reality, allowing you to write your own story on your own terms. Critical media engagement. Building media literacy around singleness means actively questioning what you consume rather than passively absorbing it. When you encounter a narrative about single life, whether in a film, article, advertisement, or social media post, ask yourself what assumptions underpin the story. Is singleness presented as a problem requiring solution? Does the character's arc suggest that personal growth must culminate in partnership? Are there single characters who remain fulfilled and complete throughout the narrative? Or does their status always shift by the final scene? This interrogation extends to the language used. Notice how often you encounter phrases like still single rather than simply single. That modifier carries judgment. DePaulo and Morris, 2005, reflecting a societal phenomenon known as singlism. Pay attention to which life events get celebrated with public recognition and which remain invisible. Engagement announcements flood your feed, but when was the last time someone posted about choosing to remain unpartnered with the same fanfare? Developing these analytical habits doesn't mean rejecting all romantic narratives or avoiding coupled friends' celebrations. It means recognizing that you're swimming in a particular cultural current, and that current has direction and force. Once you can identify the water you're in, you can choose whether to swim with it, against it, or chart an entirely different course. Curate your media consumption deliberately. Follow accounts that showcase diverse life paths. Read memoirs by people who've built rich lives outside traditional scripts. Seek out stories where singleness isn't treated as a temporary condition awaiting remedy, but as one legitimate way of moving through the world. This isn't about creating an echo chamber. It's about balancing the overwhelming volume of partnership-centric messaging with alternative perspectives. The practice becomes particularly powerful when you extend it to your immediate environment. When a friend suggests you're too picky or asks if you're putting yourself out there, recognize these as culturally scripted responses rather than objective assessments of your choices. They're repeating what they've learned from the same sources that shaped your own assumptions. What emerges from this critical engagement isn't cynicism, but clarity. You begin to distinguish between your authentic preferences and absorbed expectations. You develop immunity to narratives that suggest your life lacks validity without a partner. You recognize moments when discomfort stems not from genuine dissatisfaction, but from collision with cultural scripts. This awareness creates space for something more fundamental than media literacy. It opens the door to examining the deeper machinery of how we construct identity and worth. Because while media shapes our perceptions, it operates within larger systems that define value, success, and legitimate adulthood. Understanding those systems requires looking beyond what we watch and read to the institutional forces that structure modern life itself.